Hey, welcome to the channel. My name is Jason, and here I talk about all things story. The story I'm talking about today is one of my own. Yes, we have hit episode 44 of Worth 1000 Words, where I write a 1,000 word short story based on a piece of artwork without an outline. And today we are returning to the fantastic. I'm delving back into fantasy. However, this is dark fantasy, gloomy fantasy, grim dark. I don't know, however you want to call it. I don't know if I achieved that. It's a little bit of a slower piece, not really a whole lot of action, but it definitely allowed me to play with prose. To accompany that prose, I needed something dark, something brooding, and so I went back to Richard Skelton. I just subscribed to his channel on Bandcamp, where you can pay like 30 bucks a year and get access to all of his work. So I think it's a really cool way to support artists directly versus doing it through Spotify or something like that. But anyway, the album I chose is called Imaginary Film Scores Volume 1. I am so very glad I did because it was a great fit. And I'm sure you'll agree when you see this week's artwork. So let's check it out. This week's artwork is titled Wake Up, and it is by an artist named Artem Demira from Falgrim, Russia. So let's take a look at this piece. We have a man who is dead or dying in front of a fire, arrows protruding from his chest. His head is bowed, but what is interesting are these women, seemingly made of the earth and the moss and dirt and everything else crawling toward him. One thing I did notice as well is this figure with a bow off to the right between those two trees. And I didn't even notice it until I started writing, and so decided to incorporate that as part of the story. But I love the composition. I love the story implications here. Is this man doomed? Is he saved? I guess I will find out. Thanks, Artem. Love the piece. Love all of your work. It's very dark. It's very brooding. Just my style. So let's see what I came up with. Sleep, said a shadow of a tree who was a shadow of an armless man. Not armless, but I thought so. The bow so lithe it was invisible, whispering that word once, then twice. I did not hear if there was a third. What I heard was plate, on joint, on flesh, on moss, soft. A fire will help. It won't. I prefer cold to hot. So why? Heat burns within me now, pumps out of me, collecting in my upturned hands, as if it knows it should be there, so I can hold it, feel how heavy I am as it empties from me. Eyes and sparks and voices. I create them all. Impossibilities. I listen for the man or creature again. The forest listens. The forest knows. The moss and gossamer haze and roots and branches dripping with blood. In my hands. My insides on the outside. A tributary. I could let it go, but I don't. I can't. I know if I do, I will lose it to the bugs and the dirt and the fire. It's warm. I hate it. A beacon I wish I could snuff. There is time, though I don't have much. I am an hourglass, bottom heavy now. Sleep, says the voice. Closer, farther, somewhere in between. I listen. I let 2 handfuls of myself go, and I am lost, just as I imagined. My head is bowed, so I can see its absence. Only green, no red. Sparks and voices. I no longer see eyes. None greet me at the forest floor. None weep for me. I don't weep for myself. I can't breathe. Because of the fire. Because I am dead. Sleep. I do. That is all I can do. Sleep, drift, flow. All of these things and none of these things. Fire hangs on the edge of my vision. I hate it, but I love it. It shows me fletching, damp and split and ragged, as I am. There, the shadow of a branch of a legless bird. No, that's not right. That means nothing. I mean nothing. I will mean nothing soon. Wake. No, I'd shake my head if I could. I would answer if I could, with a voice that would extinguish that fire, because I had a voice to command a legion. Had. I have been had. My eyes are closed, but I can see. My ears are closed, but I can hear. In front of me, behind me, all around me. It rises under the skin of the earth, testing that thin layer between life and death, like a mist, like a veil, like a flood from a scalp, down a neck to shoulders to a spine, to hips and thighs and feet, ending with delicate toes. A family of toadstools, shoulder to shoulder, embracing, gouging, to move forward, closer, to me. Wake. I scream for the shadow of a tree who is a shadow of an armless man. I scream for his third, his fourth, his fifth, so they can be a family of their own, to match the toadstool's number, growing from me, like those grow from the black soil. But they don't grow, they crawl, they burrow, they exhume. I am not buried yet. I wish to be buried. The fire, it persists, it lingers, it taunts. Licking my feet, I cannot move. Spewing its heat on my face, I cannot feel. I want to see shadows. I want to feel shadows again. I was so close, but now I am so far. The voice is closer than the other had ever been. The one who ushered me to slumber. Wake. It is soft, flowing off lush hillocks to a height that brings it down like a spear, to stake me to this world, this ground, not letting me go. The fire pops, embers parting the smoke, and I feel it. I see it, I hear it, everything. I know I am wrong. I am not ready. It tells me, it shows me. I believe. My head raises, but that is all. It is enough. They don't need to speak anymore. I have heeded their call. I am at their mercy, which is pleasant. I also see the shadow that killed me. It watches from a shadow darker than itself. It does not speak. Wake, wake, wake. I am. I tell them with my voice. I know it is real. My throat vibrates with the two words, and I quell the itch it left behind with the back of my tongue. She smiles at me, the woman with the flood of hair and the feet ending with toadstools. I smile back. A beauty she is, made of all the things we hold dear. Words I cannot find to describe these things because it is a language that is made of sensations. One that unmasks a world where there is no sleep. One that glides down from cloud-laden skies to breathe unfathomable joys on the back of your neck, which encircle it like a necklace. But when you see it, it's not a necklace at all. Tresses of the woman who had been inching toward you, but is already here, lips parting to tell you to wake again, but you laugh. Because you are awake, alive and well, enjoying the fire that rages now, showing you all of their detail, in front of you, behind you, beside you. They crest again and again, endless waves. You lift your arms to hold them, all of them, while the shadow that killed you watches with envy. You'd curse that shadow if you were cruel, but you aren't. You are here, transformed, reborn into pain. I had forgotten pain. They remind me, and it spreads from my leg where she bites, the beautiful one. They are all beautiful. They tear, they feed. I look for the shadow. I listen for its command to sleep. It is gone, and I am gone. Sleep. Let us talk about the story. Let's get into the weeds and the moss and the forest here. So first of all, you'll know that I love this image quite a bit. It is a representation of dark fantasy that is exactly my style. And it's funny, as I mentioned when I was talking about the art itself, I didn't notice this figure. This image has a lot of beautiful storytelling to it. Even in addition to these creepy forest women crawling toward this body. But what I love most, honestly, is that figure in the shadows on the far right, because that person is what caused all this to happen, or is the impetus to this tale. And it's a great, almost like right to left story. I guess it's not completely accurate because I'm assuming those women rose from the earth after this man fell. So, about the writing. Now that you've heard the story, you understand what I was doing here. I assumed that this man had been fallen. He was on death's door, and these spirits, these dryads, nymphs, whatever you want to call them, were asking him to wake up. And that was countered by this man's dream, hallucination, the language of the arrows that are in his chest, but the sleep. So you'll notice that I started with sleep, ended with wake, because thankfully, again, a great title that further helped me, further helped direct me to finding the story outside of the image itself. And the prose is interesting. It's kind of dreamlike. It's very fractured, and that's what I was trying to capture, because I did it from the point of view of the fallen hero. Maybe he's not a hero, the fallen man. I wanted him to kind of be drawn to death, toward death, right? He's headed in that direction. It only changes when these women rise from the earth. So we talk a lot about, kind of in very visual, somewhat abstract language, what got him here. So all the arrows, what I heard was plate on plate on jointed flesh on moss, soft, a fire will help. So all these things are kind of fragments of what happened to him, meaning he was hit, he fell to the ground, he fell under the moss and it's soft. He decides to create a fire, and then, because why not? And he held his upturned hands, and he can see his blood just flowing from him, and he looks at it. And then, he sees eyes and sparks and voices. I create them all in possibilities. So that's the moment when he begins to hallucinate, or maybe it's not hallucinations. Maybe it's exactly what is happening before his eyes. And so I continue with that language: blood in my hands, my insides on the outside, a tributary. I could let go, but I don't. I can't. So really, this very staggered, stunted, fractured, fragmented writing, I think is a really good way to, I don't know, create a headspace for a character. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. They kind of look at things from the outside, whereas I always try to write from the inside of the character, that is, and try to convey their mental state, their physical state, emotional state, with the actual line by line stuff, rather than just describing it as you see it. And I think that's why it's important to write from the character's POV, because it drastically changes things. If I were to write this thing from an omniscient standpoint, very different story, a very different experience. I think it would be a lot less visceral. Now, some people do enjoy that. I think the one downside with writing this, and again, once I read it to myself for the recording, you get a better perspective. You start to understand what the story is. You start to see, what's missing, what works and what doesn't work. And I think in this case, you could argue that I didn't paint the picture very well that you see here. Now, you could look at that as a negative. You could look at that as a positive, because I think that from the perspective of this man, it's going to be very warped. He's seeing things. He's very, basically the world is very dreamlike because of his state. He's dying, losing all of his blood. His eyes aren't working as well as they should. His mind isn't. And so, you don't get a description like in a dark forest, twisted, a shadow hides in the gloom, observing his kill. That's going to be more of an omniscient kind of voice, and again, very different story. So I chose the latter. I think I just prefer to tell stories from the POV of the character. It's really difficult for me to get into a story unless I'm there. I find that telling it from the outside or omniscient, like essentially how everybody would recount a story that they've experienced. That's kind of the omniscient, where you're describing things how they were, even though you are technically describing your perception. I don't know. I think I really need to get in the head of this character to kind of evoke the feeling of where he was and the state he was in. And yeah, in this paragraph, this is when the women start to rise. And I always, that is purposeful there. So I'm nearing 500. And I think for the pacing of these, that is exactly when I like things to happen. Doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes it happens very much, later in the story. Sometimes it never happens. And in that case, you could argue that it's a failure or not, or maybe it's just a tiny vignette of something, however you want to experience it. But this one to me was it was kind of poetic, right? It was almost like a narrative poem, because I don't know that as a reader who's not looking at this image, and I really try to consider that when I'm writing, but I don't realize it until after I'm done, because as I'm writing this, I'm constantly looking at that image, trying to pull ideas out from it, try to pull the story from that picture. And so it's hard, right? That's why it's so important for me to read these after the fact, especially when I'm looking to publish, because this artwork will not be in the book, unfortunately. As much as I would love that, I think it would be either impossible or a nightmare to get permission from all the artists to print their works in there. And I'd hate to leave some of them out. I'd rather it be either complete or incomplete. But what I'm going to do is have some links in there so you can, readers can check it out if they want to see the actual artwork. Because I don't know, I feel like as much as I feel as if this is the collaboration between me and the artist, the stories become their own things, and it's important for me to know that they stand on their own, and hopefully this one. But now we see that these women of the forest are whispering him to wake up, wake up. He's just, it is soft, flowing off lush hillocks to a height that brings down like a spear to stake me to this world, this ground, not letting me go. All that stuff, it's just kind of that entire line is him not being able to go to sleep. He wants to die, right? He's right there on the edge of it. But then these women pull him back, and that's essentially what that is, in a very indirect way of speaking. And now his attention is brought back to the fire, the embers parting, showing the smoke, and he feels it. This is when all the women's come to life, and he becomes fully aware of this. Finally, his head, it raises, and that is all. It's enough. They don't speak anymore. I've heeded their call. So he's listening. So I think if you read this carefully, you'll get what's going on. I don't think it's too obtuse in that way, but I don't know. We'll see. I think it's going to vary from reader to reader to reader. Some readers like everything explicitly spelled out. I'm not one of them. I think that allowing the reader to kind of, imagine things in their own way is extremely important, because when you watch a film, so as much as I try to make my stories very visual, almost as if you are experiencing a film, the power that writing has over film is that of the imagination. And so you can play with that. You can collaborate with the reader to have them meet you in the middle, right? Or maybe take you places that you didn't think the story went. And I think that's the coolest thing, is when all this stuff from your subconscious just kind of spills out onto the page, and people identify things that you didn't even realize, and that's some of the coolest stuff. And I think here, especially with this kind of language, it happens more often than not because of that abstraction. Finally, we see the women. He doesn't see the women behind him yet, but we're finally seeing the woman, the beautiful lady crawling up from the ground. And you'll notice she seems to be the most human-like out of all the. If you look at the other two, I guess you can't really see their faces very well. But what you can see of this woman's face and her body, even it's smooth. It's almost lifelike. Whereas the other two are still covered with vines and mushrooms and moss, and their skin isn't quite rendered as smoothly. And I know this ended terribly for this man, but I what did you expect? Did you expect this to uh, go any other way? I think it could have. Not maybe not not if I was to write the story, but you could argue that these women are coming back to save him, right? They're not like these mermaids that I depicted them as, just waking him up because they want to feed him. So apparently they like live flesh. They don't want to eat a carcass. Maybe there's something about it that gives them power, right? The screams of the dying as they're consumed alive. I don't know. That's what I love about stuff like this. There's so much world building you can come up with just from this image itself, and then the story too, right? So if these women are there to help him to bring him back from the dead, versus consume him or curse him or whatever it may be, very different outcomes, very different ways to build this world. But because it's gloomy, I decided to go all in with it. Even though the rest of the picture is evil enough, I love that little bit of hope. And you think something's going to happen, something's nice is going to happen, and then it doesn't. And this is kind of an interesting part. And I don't know if this is just his perception or this is it truly what is going on. But while you lift your arms to hold them, all of them, while the shadow that killed you watches with envy. You'd curse that shadow if you were cruel, but you aren't. You're here, transformed, reborn into pain. So that is the turning point, right at the end. And there I hit 1,000, but I have a little bit of work to do. So really, at the very end, that's kind of the reveal, and whether or not I gave it enough time to sink in, I don't know. Sometimes I think it's much better to have it be sudden and abrupt, without too much lead in, because that's I don't want to call it a jump scare, but that's essentially kind of what it is. It's leading you down one path and then takes you down another immediately at the very end. And I don't think I was really trying to misdirect the reader in this. I wasn't trying to necessarily lead them down a path and then, give them hope at all. I just thought that, this is from the perspective of this man, and this is how it unfolded. This is exactly what happened. There was no ulterior motives on my part. So I'm just doing a final pass, final cleanup. A little over an hour, as you can see. Not too bad. I feel like I'm back in my normal time zone, and yeah, it's good. I'm very excited to not be writing 2 hours, 2.5 hour stories. Just goes to show you, they're not always easy. This one I wouldn't say was necessarily easy, but at least it didn't take me a terrible amount of time. So forwards left, inching toward the end, and filling in those gaps quickly, taking some words out, adding some more. This is always one of the most challenging parts, is just to make it all fit exactly in 1,000 words. But somehow I managed to do it, for better or worse. But I do really enjoy this time constraint, or the word constraint, because it makes you, it causes you to make these decisions, right? And you need to end at 1,000 no matter what, and that heavily influences what you're writing. And you just gotta really get those last few words in to make it all work. Welcome to the end, dear viewer. I am so glad you made it. This is where I talk about my final thoughts, what I liked, what I didn't like, maybe what I learned to do better to avoid, or maybe just decide if this thing was a complete disaster. And remember, I know it's not that interesting to many of you, but I go into much more depth than I will here during the writing analysis. That's the longest part of the video, most likely the least popular part of the video, but I do it anyway for people who may want to look behind the curtain a little bit and really just see what I was thinking while I was writing, because as we know, there's no outlines here, and so it's just kind of spilling out of my head as the clock ticks up and up and up and up. But anyway, you'll know that this was kind of a dreamy scene. You know, we have this character who's dying. He's on death's door, and we have these weird nymphs or dryads or forest spirits, these women coming up to him as he's dying. And I chose the dark road because that's always the road. That's always the right road for storytelling, at least in my opinion. But I think really the challenge for me here was finding a story with very little motion. There was not a lot going on. We had the mysterious shadowy figure in the background who presumably shot this man because of the connection to the bow and the arrow, something I did not notice until I was actually writing it and analyzing the artwork a lot more closely. And I had a decision to make. I had a decision to make either these women help him or hinder him. You know what happened. They decided to consume him. And I like the world building aspect there. And I talked about this previously, but why did they keep him alive? Like, why did they want him to be alive while they consumed him? And that's really an interesting aspect, I think, with some possibilities into what these creatures need, right? Maybe there's something about the life force that makes the meat more tasty. I have no idea, but it's things like that I like to leave up to the reader. And you could argue that it is up to my laziness that I did not decide what that was. Again, I think that's the beautiful thing about writing is what is unsaid, right? It allows the reader to fill in the gaps, and I know a lot of people out there do not appreciate that. They want every question answered. However, I don't think they really do. And if they do, they should reconsider it, goddammit. So what didn't I like? I think that in my reading, when I do the narration, I'm unsure if I'm really conveying what's going on in the picture. Like, does this story stand alone? I don't know that it does. There are hints in there. If you read closely, you will see what's going on. And I really hope it's an interesting story on its own without the accompaniment of the artwork. And that is something I've really noticed in going back, because I've been going back with my earlier works. I'm not very far, but I need to work on it more to get them ready for publication. And trying to make sure that these stories stand on their own. They don't need you to look at the artwork while you read them, although I think that's kind of a cool experience. But anyway, maybe I could have been clearer here. Maybe it's okay because it was from a very close POV of this dying character, and you know, with all of the physiological things going on as you die, you can only imagine he's not in the right headspace. He's not perceiving things as they are. But anyway, I think this was a good experiment for me to get really deeply in the head of someone who is dying, who may not perceive things correctly and true. So I hope you liked it. Let me know in the comments. I haven't mentioned it in some time, but I love suggestions. I love writing stories to art that I may not have picked on my own. And if you'd like to support the channel, consider giving me a like. If you like the video, subscribe if you like story-related content. Check out my books down in the description below. I do live streams Saturdays and Sundays. Come hang out with me. Keep reading, keep writing, and I will see you next week. Thanks. Bye. If you'd like to read the story in its non-video format, check the link in the description. I didn't edit anything else, promise. Thanks again.